I'm not pretty. I didn't say it out loud at first. I just thought it, like I had 1,000 times before. But standing there on that dusty platform, with the wind tugging at my plain brown dress and 9 other women beside me, it felt louder than ever. Because one by one, they were being chosen, and I wasn't. But what he saw in her, no one else ever did. And that choice nearly cost him everything. But he had no idea who she really was. My name is Clara, and I have spent most of my life trying to take up as little space as possible. Not because I wanted to disappear, but because it always felt like the world preferred it that way. The day I arrived in the West, I told myself I wouldn't hope for anything. Hope had a way of making things hurt more. So I stood there quietly, hands folded, eyes low, waiting for the inevitable. Rejection. It came, just like it always did, only this time, it came in silence. 9 women stood beside me when the train doors opened. 9. By the time the sun shifted just a little in the sky, I was the only one left. I didn't need anyone to explain why. I had lived with the reason my whole life. I'm not pretty. The words echoed in my mind as I turned away from that platform, clutching my small bag like it was the only thing keeping me steady. I had planned for this. Told myself I'd find work somewhere. Maybe in a kitchen, maybe cleaning, something quiet, something invisible, something that fit me. But then he called out, "Wait." I didn't know then how much that one word would change everything, or how much it would change me. Elias didn't look like a man who made impulsive decisions. Everything about him was steady, careful, like he measured his words before letting them exist. Even choosing me didn't feel like chance. It felt like certainty, and that scared me more than rejection ever had. The ride to his ranch was quiet. The wagon creaked beneath us as the horses pulled forward, kicking dust into the dry air. I sat stiffly beside him, unsure where to look, what to say, or even how to exist in this new reality. A wife. The word didn't belong to me. Not yet. "You can speak, you know," he said after a while, his voice calm but not unkind. I glanced at him briefly. I don't know what to say. Start with anything true. I thought about that, then said the only thing that felt honest. "You could have chosen someone else." He didn't respond immediately, just kept his eyes on the road ahead. "I didn't want someone else," he said finally. That answer stayed with me longer than I expected. Not because I believed it, but because I didn't understand it. The ranch wasn't much to look at when we arrived. A small house, worn wood, fences that had seen better days, land that looked tired, like it had been fighting to survive for too long. It felt familiar. "This is it," Elias said, stepping down from the wagon. I followed carefully, my boots hitting the dry ground. It wasn't grand, it wasn't beautiful, but it was his. And somehow, now it was mine too. The first few days were strange, not bad, not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. Elias didn't treat me like something fragile, but he didn't treat me like a burden either. He gave me space, but also responsibility. By the second morning, he handed me a list of things that needed to be done: fixing a broken latch, sorting supplies, preparing meals. There was no hesitation in his voice. No doubt, he expected me to manage. And I did, because working was the one thing I had always known how to do. Days turned into a rhythm. Wake up early, work until my hands ached, eat in quiet, sleep deeply. There were no grand gestures, no soft words, but there was something else, something I didn't recognize at first. Peace. Elias spoke little, but when he did, it mattered. He never raised his voice, never criticized without reason, and never, not once, made me feel like I wasn't enough. That alone was new. One evening after a long day of repairing part of the fence, I sat on the small porch, watching the sky turn shades of orange and gold. Elias stepped out a moment later, leaning against the wooden post. For a while, we said nothing. Then quietly, I asked the question that had been sitting in my chest since the day we met. Why did you really choose me? He didn't answer right away, and for a moment, I thought he wouldn't. You told the truth, he said finally. I frowned slightly. That's all? He shook his head. No one does that anymore. I let out a small breath. It's not hard. He looked at me then, really looked. When people are afraid of not being chosen. His words settled into me slowly, because he was right. I hadn't told the truth because I was brave. I had told it because I had nothing left to lose. I didn't think you'd pick me, I admitted. I know, he said. There was no pity in his voice, no regret, just understanding. I almost didn't stop, he added. My chest tightened slightly. Why did you? He looked out toward the land, the fading sunlight casting shadows across his face. Because you didn't try to be someone else. I swallowed. That's not something to admire, I said softly. It's just who I am. He nodded. Exactly. Something shifted inside me then, not all at once, but enough to feel it. Weeks passed, then months. The ranch slowly began to change. The fences stood stronger, the animals healthier, the house warmer. Not because of me alone, but because we worked together. And somewhere along the way, we stopped feeling like strangers. One night, as we sat across from each other at the small wooden table, I caught him watching me. Not in the way others used to, not with judgment, not with comparison, just watching. What? I asked, suddenly aware of myself. Nothing. But I didn't believe that. Say it, I insisted, a small smile tugging at my lips. He hesitated, then spoke. You don't hide as much anymore. The words caught me off guard. I used to? I asked. He nodded. I looked down at my hands, resting on the table. They were still rough, still marked by years of work, but they weren't shaking. I think I stopped being afraid, I said quietly. Of what? I met his eyes. Of being seen. Something in his expression softened again. Good, he said. I don't know exactly when it happened, when everything changed. Maybe it wasn't one moment. Maybe it was all the small ones, the quiet conversations, the shared work, the understanding that didn't need words. But one evening, as we stood side by side, watching the sun disappear beyond the hills, I felt it, clear and undeniable. I'm still not pretty, I said softly. The words didn't hurt anymore. They just existed. Elias turned his head slightly, looking at me with that same steady gaze. That's fine, he said. You've said that before. He nodded, then added something new. I didn't need pretty, he said. I needed real. My chest tightened, but not with pain, with something warmer, something stronger. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was lacking something. I felt like I was enough. And standing there, beside a man who saw me, not for what I wasn't, but for what I was, I realized something I had never believed before. I had not been overlooked. I had simply been waiting for someone who knew how to see. I learned a long time ago that the truth makes people uncomfortable, especially when it's about you. I'm not pretty. I didn't whisper it this time. I said it clearly, standing in front of a man who hadn't looked away from me once since he stepped onto that platform. Most men glanced, then moved on. He didn't, and that alone made me uneasy. The wind moved between us, carrying dust across the wooden boards beneath our feet. Around us, laughter echoed, other women leaving with their chosen husbands. I was the last one standing. Again. You say that like it's a warning, he said. His voice was low, steady, like nothing I said could shake it. It is, I replied. He studied me, not my face, not my clothes, but something deeper. I could feel it, and it made me want to look away. But I didn't, because if there was one thing I had left, it was honesty. Most people lie, he said after a moment. I frowned slightly. About what? About who they are. I wouldn't know how. Something in his expression shifted. Not into a smile, but into something quieter. Good, he said. That was it. No compliments, no charm, no pretending. My name is Elias, he added, holding out his hand. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to take it, but because I didn't understand why it was being offered. Clara, I said softly, placing my hand in his. His grip was firm, certain, and just like that, I became his wife. The ride to his ranch was long and silent, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It felt deliberate, like he wasn't the kind of man who filled space with meaningless words. I kept glancing at him, trying to understand. Why me? Finally, I couldn't hold it in anymore. You could have chosen anyone, I said. I didn't want anyone, he replied. That answer confused me even more. Then why come at all? I asked. He didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened slightly, like the question had touched something buried. Because being alone doesn't mean you stop needing someone, he said. That was the first time I realized. This man wasn't whole either. The ranch sat far from town, surrounded by land that looked as worn as the house itself. Nothing about it was easy. Nothing about it was beautiful. But it was honest. You won't find comfort here, Elias said as we stepped down from the wagon. I've never had it, I replied. He glanced at me briefly, and for a moment, I think he understood exactly what I meant. Life with Elias wasn't soft. There were no sweet words, no gentle reassurances, but there were no lies either. He didn't pretend to be happy, didn't pretend to be kind, didn't pretend to feel anything he didn't. And strangely, that made me feel safer than anything ever had. Days passed in hard work, fixing fences, hauling water, cooking meals that were simple but enough. Elias never hovered, never doubted my ability. He simply expected me to do what needed to be done. And I did, because for the first time, I felt like I was being treated as capable, not pitied, not overlooked. One evening I found him sitting alone outside, staring into the distance. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving only fading light behind. You do that a lot, I said, stepping closer. Do what? Look like you're somewhere else. He didn't respond, but he didn't deny it either. I sat beside him, keeping a small distance between us. You don't have to tell me, I added. Another silence. Then, she left, he said. I turned slightly. The woman I was supposed to marry, he continued. Before I came here, I didn't speak. I just listened. She said she loved me, he said flatly. Then she left with a man who had more money. There it was, the truth behind his stillness. I'm sorry, I said quietly. He shook his head. I'm not. That surprised me. I needed to see it, he added. Needed to understand what lies look like when they're dressed up as something else. I swallowed. And now? I asked. He looked at me then. Really looked. Now I don't trust anything that looks perfect, he said. A small ironic smile touched my lips. Then I suppose I'm the safest choice you could have made. To my surprise, he almost smiled. Exactly. That was the moment everything shifted. Not into love, not yet, but into something stronger than comfort. Trust. Weeks turned into months, and slowly Elias changed. He spoke more. Not a lot, but enough. He asked my opinion, listened to my answers, and one day he laughed. It caught me so off guard that I stared at him. What? He asked. You laugh, I said. He frowned slightly. I've always laughed. No, I said softly. You didn't. He didn't argue, because we both knew it was true. That night as we sat by the fire, I felt something unfamiliar rising inside me. Fear. Not the kind I was used to. Not fear of rejection. Fear of losing something I had never expected to have. I should tell you something, I said. He looked up. I don't think I can be what you deserve, I admitted. He didn't react immediately. I don't know how to be more than this, I continued. I don't know how to be charming, or beautiful, or... Clara. My voice stopped. That's not what I need, he said. I shook my head slightly. You say that now. But, I said it the day I chose you, he interrupted, his voice firmer now. Silence filled the space between us. I don't need pretty, he said again. I need honest. My chest tightened. And you've been that, every single day. I looked down, my hands trembling slightly. No one's ever said that like it mattered, I whispered. He leaned forward slightly. That's because they didn't understand its worth. I looked back up at him. And you do? He held my gaze. I do now. Something broke inside me then. Not painfully, but completely. All the years of believing I wasn't enough. All the quiet moments of feeling invisible. All the times I told myself I would never be chosen. They didn't disappear, but they softened. Because for the first time, someone saw me clearly, and stayed. I'm still not pretty, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Elias didn't hesitate. Good, he replied. A small tear slipped down my cheek, but I was smiling, because this time, it didn't feel like something was missing. It felt like something had finally been found. I knew from the beginning, I wasn't meant to stay, not really. Even after Elias chose me, even after I stepped onto his land, into his home, into a life I had never imagined, there was always a quiet voice inside me whispering, this isn't yours. Because nothing that fragile ever was. The ranch was dying when I arrived. You could see it in everything. The cracked earth that hadn't felt rain in too long, the fences leaning like they were too tired to stand. The house, quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful, just empty. This place won't be easy, Elias told me on the first day. I looked around at the dry land, then back at him. I'm not afraid of hard, I said. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Good, he replied, because easy doesn't live here. And he was right. The days were long, longer than anything I had ever known. I woke before the sun, worked until my hands burned, and fell into bed too tired to dream. There was always something to fix, something to carry, something to save. And slowly, without realizing it, I stopped thinking about leaving. Not because I believed I belonged, but because there was no time to think about anything else. Elias worked just as hard, harder maybe, but he didn't complain, didn't waste words. We moved around each other like two people who understood something unspoken. Not love, not yet, but partnership. One evening, as we stood side by side repairing a section of broken fence, I glanced at him. You didn't choose me because of this, did you? I asked. He didn't look up. Because of what? This work, I said. You needed help. He drove another nail into the wood before answering. I needed someone I could trust, he said. I swallowed. That's not the same thing. This time, he looked at me. It is to me. I didn't argue. But the voice inside me didn't go quiet, because trust could be replaced, and I had never been anyone's first choice. Weeks passed, then months. The ranch began to change. Not all at once, but enough to notice. The fences stood straighter. The animals looked stronger. Even the house felt warmer. Sometimes I would catch Elias watching it all, not with pride, but with something quieter, relief. And every time I saw it, that voice inside me would whisper again, he needed help, that's all. Then one day, everything changed. It started with a man named Richard. I saw him before Elias did. A clean coat, polished boots. A horse that had never known hard labor. He didn't belong here. Can I help you? I asked as he approached. He barely looked at me. I'm here to see Elias. Of course he was. I nodded toward the house. He's inside. Richard stepped past me without another word, like I was part of the land, something useful, but not worth noticing. I told myself it didn't matter. I was used to that, but something about him left a weight in my chest. I found Elias inside moments later. The moment he saw Richard, his entire posture changed. Tense, guarded. "What do you want?" Elias asked. Richard smiled, like this was all some kind of game. "I came to offer you a way out." I stayed quiet, standing near the doorway, unseen, unimportant. "Out of what?" Elias asked. "This," Richard said, gesturing around. "This failing ranch, the debt, the struggle." My chest tightened. Elias didn't respond. Richard took a slow step forward. "My father is willing to clear everything," he continued. "Every debt, every problem." Silence. "And what does he want in return?" Elias asked. Richard's smile widened slightly. "My sister." The room went still. "She's beautiful," he added casually. "Everything a man could want." I felt something cold settle inside me. "And?" Elias said. Richard's eyes flicked toward me briefly. Just a glance. But it said everything. "You let go of this arrangement," he said. Arrangement. Not marriage, not partnership. Just something temporary. I didn't wait to hear the rest. I stepped outside before my face could betray me. The air felt heavier now, harder to breathe. Of course this would happen. A beautiful woman, a way out, a better life. Everything I was not. That night I packed my bag, quietly, carefully. I had done this before, left places where I didn't belong. This time it just hurt more. I stepped toward the door just as Elias walked in. He stopped when he saw the bag in my hand. "What are you doing?" he asked. My voice stayed steady. "I'm leaving." "No." The word came fast, sharp. I blinked, surprised. "You have a better option now. You don't need me anymore." His expression darkened slightly. "I never needed you like that." I let out a small, bitter breath. "Of course you didn't. That's not what I meant." "Isn't it?" I asked, finally looking at him. "You needed help. I gave it. Now you have something better. Clara." "She's beautiful," I continued, my voice breaking despite my effort to stay calm. "She can give you a life I can't." Silence. Then, "I don't want that life." The words hit harder than I expected. "Why?" I whispered. He stepped closer, slowly, carefully. "Because it's not real," he said. I shook my head. "That doesn't make sense." "It does to me." He stopped in front of me now, close enough that I couldn't look away. "I didn't choose you because I had no options," he said. My chest tightened. "I chose you because you were the only one I trusted to stay when things got hard." My grip on the bag loosened. "And now?" I asked quietly. His voice didn't waver. "Now I know I was right." Something inside me broke, not in pain, but in release. "I'm not pretty," I said, the words barely holding together. He nodded once. "I know." A tear slipped down my cheek. "I'm not people want." He reached out then, taking the bag gently from my hands and setting it aside. "You're what I want," he said. I looked at him, searching for doubt, for hesitation, for anything that would prove this wasn't real. There was nothing. "I don't need fancy," he added quietly. "Caught. And you've been that from the very beginning." For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. I didn't feel like I had to compete. I didn't feel like I was about to be replaced. I just felt chosen. I used to avoid mirrors, not because I didn't have one, but because I didn't need it to tell me what I already knew. I'm not pretty. It wasn't something I cried about anymore. It was just a fact. Like the sky being blue or the earth being dry beneath my feet. So I learned something early in life. If you're not meant to be seen, you learn how to disappear. I wasn't always like that. There was a time, when I was younger, when I laughed too loudly, spoke too freely, and believed people when they said things like, Someone will love you someday. But life has a way of correcting those kinds of thoughts. Little by little, you notice the way people look past you, the way conversations shift when someone prettier walks into the room, the way compliments are given to everyone else, but never to you. So I adapted. I stopped trying, stopped hoping, stopped expecting anything from anyone. By the time I stepped off that train in the West, I had already made peace with the life I thought I would have. A quiet one, a lonely one. I stood at the edge of the platform, hands folded tightly, doing what I did best, not being noticed. The other women were beautiful. There's no point pretending otherwise. Soft smiles, bright eyes, dresses that moved like they belonged in a better world. Men approached them easily, confidently, like choosing was simple when everything looked right. I didn't blame them. Why would they choose me? So when the last man stepped forward and stopped in front of me, I assumed he was mistaken. "You're still here," he said. I nodded slightly. "Looks that way." His eyes didn't move from mine, not once. That made me uncomfortable. "You should go," I said quietly. He frowned. "Why?" "Because there's nothing here for you," I replied. It wasn't bitterness, just truth. "I'm not pretty," I added, the words coming easily. "You don't have to pretend." I expected him to look away then. Expected that moment of awkwardness. But it never came. Instead, he said something that felt wrong. I blinked. "I don't need pretty." No one had ever said that to me before. I didn't know what to do with it. The man, Elias, didn't explain himself, didn't try to soften his words. He just held out his hand. And for reasons I still don't fully understand, I took it. The ranch was quiet, not empty, just still. Like it had been waiting. For what? I wasn't sure. Elias didn't talk much on the way there, and I didn't ask questions. That was another thing I had learned. If you don't expect answers, you don't get disappointed. Life on the ranch began simply. Work, silence, routine. I kept my head down, did what needed to be done, stayed out of the way. It was easy, because that's what I had always done. But Elias didn't treat me like I was invisible. At first I thought it was coincidence. Small things. He asked me what I thought about repairing the fence, instead of just doing it himself. He handed me tools without hesitation, like he expected me to know how to use them. He listened, when I spoke, politely. Not out of obligation, but like my words actually mattered. That confused me more than anything else. One afternoon, I was working near the well when he approached. "The north fence needs reinforcing," he said. I nodded. "I'll take care of it." He didn't leave. Instead, he asked, "How would you do it?" I paused. No one had ever asked me that before. I'd double the posts," I said slowly. "The ground's too loose, one won't hold." He considered that, then nodded. "Do it your way." And just like that, something small shifted inside me. Days turned into weeks, and without realizing it, I started to change. Not in big noticeable ways, but in quiet ones. I spoke a little more, stood a little straighter, stopped shrinking quite so much. It scared me, because it felt like stepping into a space I didn't belong in. One evening, as I washed my hands in a small basin, I caught my reflection in the water. I froze. For a moment, I didn't look away. Not because I suddenly liked what I saw, but because I didn't hate it as much. That was new. "You're staring," Elias said from behind me. I wasn't. "You were," he said calmly. I hesitated, then admitted quietly, "I don't usually look." "Why not?" The question felt too big, too heavy. "You know why," I said. He stepped closer, not invading, just present. "No," he said, "I don't." I swallowed. "Because there's nothing worth seeing." The words hung in the air. He didn't react immediately. Didn't argue. Didn't dismiss it. Then, "You're wrong." I let out a small breath, almost a laugh. "No," I said softly. "I'm realistic." He shook his head. "You're used to being overlooked," he said. "That's not the same thing." I turned to face him then. "It feels the same." His gaze didn't waver. "It's not." Silence settled between us. Then he said something that stayed with me long after that moment. "Just because people didn't see you doesn't mean there was nothing there." I didn't know how to respond, because part of me wanted to believe him, and part of me was afraid to. After that, things changed faster. Not around me, but inside me. I started noticing things. The way Elias listened without interrupting. The way he trusted me without question. The way he never once made me feel like I needed to be anything other than what I was. And slowly, I stopped hiding. Not completely, but enough to feel it. One night we sat outside under a sky full of stars. "You've changed," he said. "Have I?" He nodded. "You don't disappear anymore." I smiled faintly. "I'm trying not to." "Why?" I thought about that, then answered honestly. "Because you see me anyway." For a moment, he didn't speak. Then he said, "Good." I took a breath. "I'm still not pretty," I added quietly. The words felt different now. Less like pain, more like truth. He looked at me the same way he always had. Steady, certain. "That's fine," he said. I smiled a little. "I know. And for the first time in my life, I meant it. Because I had learned something I never thought I would. Being seen had nothing to do with being pretty. It had everything to do with being real. And for the first time, I wasn't hiding from that anymore. I think some people are born whole. And some of us spend our lives learning how to live with the cracks. I was one of the cracked ones. Not in a way people could see right away. Not broken like glass, sharp and obvious. More like something worn down over time, softened in the wrong places, hollow where something should have been. I'm not pretty. By the time I met Elias, those words didn't hurt anymore. They didn't need to. They had already done their damage. They had shaped how I walked, how I spoke, how I existed. I didn't expect love. I didn't expect kindness. And I certainly didn't expect to be chosen. But somehow, I was. Elias didn't look at me the way others did. He didn't glance and turn away. Didn't measure me against something better. He just looked. And that alone felt unfamiliar. Our marriage didn't begin with warmth. It didn't begin with laughter or soft words. It began with silence. Not the uncomfortable kind. Not the kind that begs to be filled. The kind that simply exists. We shared space before we shared anything else. Meals at the same table. Work under the same sun. Rest under the same roof. Days passed without much conversation. And strangely, that didn't bother me. Because for the first time in my life, silence didn't feel like rejection. It felt like understanding. Elias was not an easy man. Not cold, but closed. There was something behind his eyes. Something he didn't speak about. Something heavy. I didn't ask, because I understood what it meant to carry things you couldn't explain. So we lived like that. Two quiet people, learning each other without words. Until one night, everything shifted. The storm came without warning. The wind howled against the walls, shaking the windows, rattling the door like it was trying to get in. Rain poured hard against the roof, loud enough to drown out thought. I woke suddenly, my heart racing. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then I heard it, a sound I had never heard from Elias before. Not anger, not frustration, fear. I stepped out into the main room, the cold floor beneath my feet, and saw him sitting there, still, rigid. But his hands, they were shaking. "Elias?" I said softly. He didn't respond. I moved closer, carefully. "You're all right," I said. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew they weren't enough, because he wasn't. His eyes were distant, like he was somewhere else entirely. "It's just a storm," I added. He let out a breath, but it wasn't relief. "It's not the storm," he said. His voice was tight, controlled. I didn't ask what it was. I just sat down beside him. Close, but not too close. Minutes passed. Then slowly, he spoke. "I lost everything once," he said. I stayed quiet. "Not land, not money." His jaw tightened. "People." Something in my chest shifted. "I thought I could trust them," he continued. "Thought I knew what was real." The storm outside grew louder, but his voice stayed steady. I was wrong. I understood then, not the details, but the feeling. The kind that doesn't leave you. "You don't have to carry it alone," I said quietly. He let out a small, humorless breath. "That's not how it works." "No," I said, "but it can." He looked at me then. Really looked. "Why would you say that?" he asked. The answer came easier than I expected. "Because I've been carrying things alone my whole life," I said. "And it doesn't make them lighter." Silence. Then something changed. Not outside, but between us. He didn't move away, didn't shut down. He stayed, and that was the beginning. After that night, things didn't suddenly become easy, but they became real. We started talking more. Not about everything, not all at once, but enough. Enough to understand. Enough to trust. And slowly, the walls we both carried began to crack. Not fall, just crack. One evening as we sat side by side, watching the sun disappear beyond the hills, I felt it again. That familiar thought. "I'm not pretty," I said. The words slipped out without thinking. Old habit. Elias didn't respond immediately. Then, "Good." I looked at him, surprised. He met my gaze calmly. "Pretty fades," he said. "It lies. It distracts." I frowned slightly. That's not always true. But it's never enough. I looked away, thinking. "Then what is?" I asked. His answer came without hesitation. "This." I glanced back at him. "This what?" He gestured slightly between us. "This honesty. This quiet. This knowing that what's here isn't pretending to be something else." My chest tightened. "A love that doesn't need to be seen to be real," he added. The words settled deep inside me. Because that's what this was. Not loud, not perfect, not something people would envy from a distance, but something steady, something true, something that didn't need mirrors. "I don't know how to be anything else," I admitted. He nodded. "Good." A small smile touched my lips. "You say that a lot. Because it matters." I looked down at my hands, then back at him. "I used to think something was missing," I said. "And now?" I took a slow breath. "Now I think I was just looking in the wrong places." He didn't respond, but he didn't need to, because we both understood. We weren't perfect, we weren't whole, but together, we weren't broken either. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I needed to be more. I didn't feel like I needed to change. I didn't feel like I needed to be seen by the world. Because I was already seen by the one person who mattered.